Good evening, everyone. My name is Asad Lalji. I run Avid Learning. Thank you for being here in such large numbers. We had 145 people who were supposed to come, but thank you for being here. And they're being live streamed, so hopefully many of them are sitting at home in the coolness of their home and watching this. Photography is a way of feeling, of touching, of loving. What you have caught on film is captured forever. It remembers little things long after you've forgotten everything. These are the words of the renowned 20th century American photographer Aaron Siskin. Eloquently captures how photography preserves memories and feelings that may otherwise fade over time. Through the lens of a camera, we capture not merely the physical reality before us, but also the essence of time, preserving the fleeting instances that would otherwise be lost. Within the confines of photography lies a doorway of personal narratives, a portal through which we can revisit bygone eras, commune with cherished experiences, and trace the contours of loved ones' faces. Photography has always been an important part of Avid Learning's curatorial philosophy. We've done masterclasses, presentations, workshops, and various aspects of photography, from street to digital to fashion to photojournalism, and many more. Tonight, we're here to celebrate Sheetal Mallar's exhibition, Braided, and the release of her self-published photobook. We will look at how photographs preserve family histories, document life stories, and construct narratives that endure through time. That brings me to the task at hand. Echoes of Time, the art of memory archiving, presented by Art Musings and Avid Learning. We will commence this evening with a panel discussion looking at how images evoke fading memories, dwelling into the depth and intimacy of personal identities and familiar bonds. After the discussion, Sheetal will lead us on a curated walkthrough of this exhibition, giving us glimpses into her artistic vision, creative process that breathed life into these captivating images. Before we begin, a big thank you to Sangeeta for hosting us here tonight. This today rekindles our long-standing collaboration with Art Musings. In 2019, we had collaborated to present the Beyond Contemporary Art series here, though my personal journey with Art Musings goes back to the late 1990 or early 2000s, when I bought my first painting from Shanti Auntie out here. But without further ado, please join me in welcoming contemporary Indian photographer Sheetal Mallar. Come on, clap, guys. Artist, photographer, and filmmaker Philippe Kalia. And our moderator for this evening, Zahara Amruddin. Zara is no stranger to Avid, has just completed a workshop with us a couple of months ago. But thank you all for being here in such, sit guys, in such large numbers. And over to you, Zara. I'm giving you your mic also as promised.
Thank you. We're matching. Firstly, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Thank you so much, Avid, and thank you, Sangeeta. And thank you, Sheetal and Philippe. So we're going to have like a really interesting conversation today, and it's something that as photographers we very closely work with, the idea of memory. And it might not be that we work with memory directly, but 5 years down the line, suddenly the images that we made become memories. And when I was doing some research for this talk, I kind of realized that I wanted to start off with talking about my own memory that I recently had with my maternal grandmother, my Nani. And she was telling me how every summer, the entire family used to, so my great-grandfather booked a home in Panchgani and took the entire family for 15 days. And it became a ritual, and memory is also a ritual. On the 5th year, she decided to make a little card for him as a thank you. And what she did was, she had photographs collected from all of those different trips. She put it into a card and wrote captions for each of them. Her own made-up captions. It's not a memory that happened, but a memory that she thought of. And that was her way of saying thank you to her grandfather. And it's a really lovely experience for me, because there were also images of my parents in there, because my parents have known each other since they were children. And it really evoked a lot in me. So I was wondering if what your experiences were working with family, well, not necessarily working with family archives, but experiences of growing up with photographs, if you all can shed light upon that.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So thanks, Zara, for this intro. I think my journey with photography starts with family photographs. I had like a heap of family albums that I started looking at after a certain age, slowly revisiting them. I also had a collection of videos, VHS videos that my dad was taking. He was an avid photographer and video maker, like a family recordist, archivist. I don't know exactly how to describe. But that definitely, influenced like my journey and set this fascination, I think, for images, photographs, and even the device, like the recording device. I shared this memory with you, for instance, that and that I can see in the videos of me as a child. Like when my dad is pointing at the camera, is pointing the camera to me, I'm pointing my finger back at him and I'm saying, Lalu, Lalu, because I really want to look through that viewfinder that's also like signaling that it's recording because of its like little red light, red dot that I could see. And he would let me peek in like very rarely, but I think there was immediately, that desire that was set to like peep into this like viewfinder and camera. Now, thinking about tonight's conversation and our relationship with family photographs, I've realized that there were two moments in this journey that were a little bit like ruptures for me. Like one was when I saw this film by, I can't remember the director's name, but this film called Waltz with Bashir. I don't know if some of you have seen it. It's a yes, animated film. So at some point is mentioned this psychological study that was done on people and how like they were shown like childhood photographs that were actually like Photoshop that were made up, and they were told like, okay, like, do you remember this part of your childhood? And like a certain portion of the people would answer yes, like maybe 30% or 50%. I don't remember the exact figure, but suddenly like that really like broke something in my sort of faith to like, the photograph as this like recorder of truth. But also I guess it set like, the field for like an investigation about the medium. Another experience was just my life here because, I grew up in France and I moved to India first time when I was 21, but I moved in Bombay in 2011 to be exact. And initially, like, I was not making so many photographs as much as researching, writing on photography, but I was working on a collective project once with friends. Our collective was called Bind. And we did this project with a number of families that were living on a street next to the Willingdon Club, actually a street known as Bodyguard Lane that crosses through the golf course. And in that case, like the families, like initially it was a kind of NGO assignment where we were asked to shoot and document like what is the experience of homelessness in Bombay today, But our engagement continued on a personal level, and we asked the people like what were their own photographs. Actually, we were more interested also in seeing like how, putting down our own cameras and seeing like what is the photos that the people have. And we realized naturally that they didn't have so many, that a lot of them had lost also their images because either of like demolition drives and in the process of losing their belongings and their precious stuff, like photographs would also be lost, or even just because of climatic condition and the monsoon. And this is a common experience also for anyone, like I guess, like keeping photographs in Bombay and in humid, like, cities, where like the effect of time, is also seen on the surface of these images. So there were a lot of images that were like, that were partly damaged. And so, I mean, it struck me how much, I mean, even though it's a very elementary reality, but how much also like growing up with a family album in the end is a social privilege. It's a form of, there's also a class, there's a cultural aspect to it, but there's also a class aspect to it. And it's not something that's given to everyone. So then that set my inquiry into the medium through two parameters. One is like the doubt about the reliability of the medium, and also its historical dimension, the fact that a lot of people exist like without family albums, without photographs to look back at, and how does that work, and how does your relationship to the past like can be built, in that absence of a family album or family photos.
Yeah, it's so true, because I was wondering if my dad wasn't the one to take all these beautiful family pictures that we have. You don't have any sort of documentation of it at all, and you don't even remember. See, if you're really small, you don't even actually recollect all the things, all the places you've been to, all the good times and things. So I feel like family albums to me have been key. So actually, all my family albums are in my apartment, because I really value it and treasure it. And then you can see, like, even when these images, like he was saying, that, there's no reliability really because of the medium, because, they'll decay at some point. But even the decay actually sort of is so meaningful in that way, And so I'm a big fan of family albums, and I feel like we should all make them. And in this work especially, I felt that I wanted to create a family album because I was losing my grandmother, and I wanted to sort of document and hold on to people I know that, in a few years, they will not be around. So my whole idea of starting this work actually was actually to make a family album. So when I began the work, I had no intention of making anything. I just wanted to document it. And I felt that, the whole thing came from the fact that I felt like I had lost too much time with them. I was always busy. I started working really young when I was a teenager, and I'd spent so much time away. So this need to document when my life transitioned from like a really fast pace to a slower pace, I kind of suddenly started feeling this thing of all this time lost, and trying to make it up, like by taking images and hanging out with them. So I was thinking, and I felt like my grandmother's childhood, like we have no archive of it at all, because, obviously back then I have like one picture of my grandmother when she was really young. So I felt like I wanted to, in this work, I wanted to sort of bring in that aspect. And I thought, why don't I try to create my Amma's world, from all the stories I'd heard. So I thought, I'll go back to my hometown and sort of go to the old family house. Now the old family house is not there anymore. So I go to other homes that remind me of the old family house. And then I go to the fields where she may have played. Any young child that like feels like her, she was really feisty. So I thought, this could be a young her. And I tried to create her world. And so that's what I did in this work. And I kind of felt like it would have been incomplete without having that kind of Amma's family album, so to say, which didn't exist really, but then at least like it existed in in my head. So I thought I'll put it out there.
Yeah, and that's really lovely because, we're all kind of looking out for these prompts. And it also brings me to wonder, as photographers, what is it that we choose to showcase? And how do we choose to showcase certain aspects of time and leave out other aspects of it? What frames do we choose to make? And what frames do we choose to let go of? And how does one decide on that aspect of things? And also, I was also wondering if memory is as much about forgetting as it is about remembering.
Yeah, so maybe I can answer that. See, I see two different things in the selection process as a photographer. There's A, what you photograph, and B, what you share with the world as a form of an exhibition, a print, a book. So, because you use the word framing. So for framing, it's sometimes in my case, and I guess many photographers' case, the urge to photograph is actually neither to remember nor to forget. And it's not about memory. And I think it's important also to assert that as practitioners is that I see photography as just also a way to see how the world look as photographs. I mean, it's actually a quote from this American photographer called Lee Friedlander. I'm photographing because I want to see how the world looks when photographed. So it's about the pleasure, in a sense, of seeing things a certain way, framed also in a non-stereoscopic way on the print, on the plane. So that's a very, it's not burdened in that sense by the, the mission of leaving a trace. And I think it's also important to recognize that. Now, there is some photography that is induced by a need to leave a mark. And in my practice, I see it at the level of more like collective memory than personal memory. So with the project that I was telling you about, which was basically about these families living on the pavement near Mumbai Central. The idea, which is an experiment, was working with those family photographs, was also to leave a trace in the city about the fact that, these families were also part of the social fabric of the cities. Some images are missing, which is why in this book, which you might want to see later, or I'll circulate it, there's also a certain amount of text. But the idea is that this object might end up in I don't know if Chor Bazaar would still exist in 50 years, but I see it as a bottle in the sea, and that the fact is in 50 years, someone might pick up this album, look at it and think oh, this is also Bombay of that time, because otherwise, we know how official narratives can crush, micro histories and small existences in that way. Yeah, there is a desire to leave a trace for the collective memory of the city. In another project that I've done, which I relate also to the idea of collective memory, so it's not really family photography unless we consider ourselves to be part of a big family. I mean, that's another debate. But it's a work about museums in India and museum spaces. And today, many things in the country, this landscape is changing fast, Certain things are being also removed, certain things are being changed. So in that process, parts of the museums were redeveloped in a different way. And in that sense, having photographed those parts of the museum that do not exist anymore, that create a historical records that also certain, I guess, bodies or other practitioners or other researchers would have, and even the those institutions will keep probably an archive of those spaces. But this is a more like, this is an archive with my subjective gaze, in a sense, you know. I hope that eventually also this body of work, which came into the form of a book, but also like as a much larger database, you know, can be accessible for like researchers, historians. So yeah, that leads to the point that I think like, how do I select what I put out is also when I see that there's a potential for like maybe the larger social good, and you know, for like a public discussion, for a public purpose in that sense. That's one of my way of like choosing what I will work on, what I will edit, etc.
For me, in my personal work, I usually work on instinct. So I'm not a planner. I'll usually start a work and then just see where it goes, and I'll see if I even want to engage with it for a long time, and if I find myself engaging with it, and then I have time to ask myself all these questions, like why am I really doing it, and what does it really mean on a deeper level. So I kind of hold on to anchors, I think, if I want to do a long-term project. So if I have the anchors, then it's easier for me to weave stories around that. So for example, in Braided, I had, because obviously I've shot this work for 12 years on and off, and so clearly I have like thousands of images, you know. So then the struggle of what do you include in the work and what you don't. And if I have to take someone down my emotional journey, if I have to sort of explain it to somebody else, and how will I do it? So then I need to have these anchors. So in this case, I tried to like have hair as an anchor. So then what does hair really mean? So I'll use it metaphorically in the work. So it'll be about the braiding rituals I want to talk about. So all the intimacy which is created with the act of braiding. So, you know, I've always had long hair. So for school, all those years in school, so, you know, you're oiling the hair, and then you're combing it, and braiding is like half an hour ritual with your mom every day. And I think when you're that young, you don't quite understand it. But that kind of intimacy which is created when you do that every day, and that loving way that you spend time with her. So when you're much older, you realize what that really meant. I mean, it meant way beyond just the braiding of the hair, you know. It's like, so I like to think of it as these bonding rituals, which will, which is like the actual meaning behind that anchor. So in this work, I had like a few anchors. I had that, and then the act of that repetition, you know. So this ritualistic thing we used to do this other thing, which was a dress-up ritual, where we sort of used to go for an imaginary shadi. There's no shadi to go to, but all the shadi clothes are there in the house. So we're like, okay, cool, you know. So we used to do this like every few months. We used to get fully dressed up and talk about everything we had seen in some shadi we've actually been to. And, you know, all these stories that would come up. And then, so I think these kind of things, in the end, when you think back about your family album, like in my case, the family album I wanted to create, and I felt like these are the anchors which I'm going to really actually hold on to, you know. So I think that's how I try to sort of think of what do I really want to keep in, and what do I want to maybe leave it out, you know, because you can't possibly have everything in a book. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Can I react to?
Yeah, of course.
No, I'm actually continuing on this body of work, like wondering that process is about like also making a family album public.
Yes.
And it's not something natural, you know, or intuitive. Like actually family albums
It's not actually.
are for families generally.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and I guess both of us have this, I've taken that step forward to also like, cross, from the private also of these three families, or for your family, like to make part of it public. And for me, there was a huge question in terms of like also filtering privacy, dignity. And so I'm wondering, like, how did you manage, this, this struggle,
Fine
between
line.
like, this fine line, and even like when I see that picture, where there's a cutout actually of your grandma. So I'm wondering, like, for you, even the selection like happens like within the frame in that sense,
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, how did that work for you? Because that's really what I felt also while seeing the show, is that there was a balance, in terms of also like how much can I show, how much don't
How
I
much
not
am I
want to
really
show.
showing? Yeah.
Which is also to do with the fictional aspect and the recreation, I guess.
Yeah. I think it is a tricky one because you want to share, but you want to also, like you're saying, hold on to, like make sure that you're not crossing the line, So and they're all such sensitive, sort of like every image means something to me. So I have to say it was a struggle because it's not easy to share, like especially things from home. And so I thought I'll make the book in 1 year, but it took me 4 years to make this book. I kept changing it. COVID helped actually. First, at the beginning of COVID, I was so frustrated. I was like, oh my God, here I am, like it's stuck. But actually, it allowed me to relook at everything. I saw the whole thing again. And it just, because I sat with it quietly and I included drawings, and it gave me a lot of time to understand how much do I want to share, and what will this sharing even mean? Because at the end of the day, I wanted it to start as my story, but then I didn't want it to be about my story. I wanted it to become other people's stories. So that's what I was most interested in, because when you're sharing, you also ask, why are you even sharing all this, like what's the reason behind it? So for me, the reason was, I think that I just wanted it to evoke this, a similar feeling I was having, and just like, to sort of like think about our family albums and continue making them,
And talking about this feeling of sharing, when I was walking through the show with Sheetal, I'm a photographer as well, and I'm also working on documenting my great-grandfather's home that I grew up in, and now I'm seeing a new generation grow up in as well with a new little niece. And the biggest thing was my mom, who would be walking around, doing all of her errands, and she would always be like, stop photographing me in my nightie. Why are you photographing me in my nightie? And I was asking Sheetal if she ever sort of experienced this, photographing her grandmother. And then she went on to say that she actually loved it. She loved being photographed, and she would keep putting red lipstick.
Yeah.
And
painting her nails, yeah.
Yeah, painting her nails and, things like that.
Yeah.
So
it was really, because I didn't know sort of how she'll react, because the camera was a new thing in my life at the time, and the main objective was to actually hang out with her. The camera was like a thing of play, so we can play with it. And she really, she was great actually. The first time she was posing for every picture, I was like, Amma, I can't pose for everything. So, and then she really started enjoying it. It became like a thing of play, and, she would get dressed, and I'd be like, be natural, no? So she
Pose
understood,
naturally.
yeah. I said, pose, pose naturally. So she got it so well. One day I thought, like, I'm doing a candid, and she said, how is it? I was like, wow. Yeah, so...
Yeah.
It was great, actually, yeah.
That's lovely. As recently I watched a really poignant documentary by activist and photographer Nan Golding, and it's called All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. And in that, she says very beautifully, actually, that you're often told you didn't see that, that didn't happen, you didn't hear that. And then what do? How do you believe yourself? How do you continue to trust yourself? And how do you show the world that you did experience that? You did feel that. And that's the reason I take pictures. And so I was wondering if I had to put it very simply in a question. Why do you make pictures?
Okay. I think personally for me, I make images to experience something. So if I want to experience a situation or family or friends, and that's my main goal to start making the images. So I don't really shoot with the end product in mind because I usually have no idea what the end product will be like. So the experience for me is the thing. I might also like shoot something and not see it immediately because I kind of feel like, oh, like I've had my experience and it gets done, you know. So that's my main, I think that's my trigger actually to make the images. And Nan Golden, by the way, is just, she's so brilliant. I've not seen the documentary though I've seen her other works and I think she is, she's so brave because she's able to share such, like the most private things in her life. She's able to share her friends, her struggles, addictions, illnesses, and I just find that she's absolutely brilliant. So I actually, the same time I was doing this work, I'd started another body of work. And again, it came from the time when I was transitioning from one profession into the other, from fashion into like taking images. So I was kind of feeling uprooted at that point because, you know, from a very fast-paced life, like everything had slowed down. So I wanted to reconnect back with my friends, reconnect back with Bombay, with the family. So at the same time I started Braided, I also started another body of work called Alone Together, where I started shooting all my friends. And again, the reason to start that was that I think I'd been away for so long that so many of my experiences with my friends was in my head, you know, like in my memory actually. I would remember that amazing conversation we had had till like 5 in the morning, or that party we had been to, it was so great, and it was like 5 years ago. And you know, so I think sometimes in the modern day, I find that so many of our relationships might just exist in your memory because you don't see them. You know, you don't have real-time experiences with them all the time. Like, so I kind of feel like it's, that's the reason I started doing my Alone Together work. Because I remembered like Nan Golden with her friends and that whole thing. So that body of work also, it was like a long-term thing. I never really knew why I was doing it, but then slowly over the years I realized, you know, like how important friends are and how if you're in a big city like Bombay where people are usually just transiting through, your friends really become your family, you know, and what that really means. So I think, again, the camera became like a tool, like a matter of play. It was easier to like hang out the whole day after you haven't hung out like in years. So yeah, so that's the reason that work came about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do see that potential in the camera with some of the works that I do. Like especially now, I'm working on a project in Bombay, and a lot of the pictures rely on actually like meeting random people in the street, making something with them, like trying to do street photography, but in a more like collaborative way, and breaking the distance between me and my subject. So I think I identify with this. On the other hand, like I do tend to like my work is not too much about the biographical or the autobiographical, unlike Sheetal's or unlike Nan Goldin, for instance. I mean, I see like a similar desire to also keep a trace for, like, she's talking about like keeping a proof, you know, that this existed, that this was like that, I didn't dream it. So, I mean, with these works that I was talking about, I think I'm trying to like rely on the same fundamentals, but at a collective level, maybe. Then, yeah, I mean, why making pictures? Like, also, everyone makes pictures, especially today. Like, so what does it mean to make pictures? I think that it's like having that other stage of, I mean, there's a first stage would be to make the pictures that society doesn't want you to make, you know. Let's say, like, you'd have to take the photo of the monument and family, this, now, you know. So your first, I mean, why I'll make pictures, the first reason, I think, just a bit of a teenager, like, attitude of, like, transgressing boundaries. I mean, that's the first, I think, phase, you know. It was like, no, okay, I'm going to shoot, like, in between those tropes, you know, trying to, like, show what is not meant to be shown, even though, like, I mean, that can also, like, derive into some just, like, focusing on, like, trash, I don't know. But I think that's though, like, an impetus, you know, for, like, being a photographer. It's like looking away from what you're being told to look at. But then I think, yeah, today, it's more than that. It's also like, what do you make with these photographs? And for me, like, practice is really about, like, building a small world, you know, a web of, like, weaving a web of, like, signs and images, like there is tonight in this space, you know, which is like, then it becomes close to, I mean, you can relate it to architecture, to music, you know, it's about composing. Which is why, like, books were so important for me as a discovery, like photo books. Like, when I was living in Bombay, I'm now based in Bangalore, just as an information, but I used to live in Bombay for like 9 years, and I run a photo book library for 5 years called Bind, which is now turned into Jojo Library. Little promotion moment, yeah. Go to Shivaji
Lovely
Park.
space in Shivaji Park.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
free.
And their cats. So, and there are many books, yeah, like it's a collection of, like, books from all over the world, like from independent publishers. And I think, you know, what this really taught me is that, yeah, making pictures is really not enough, you know. And being a photographer means, like, making sense out of this, like, accumulation of signs and images and yeah, building something. And so the book is, like, the gallery space is a form of, like, you know, it's a frame. It's like, it has limits. So it helps you, like, put something together. The same with the book, you know, it, like, you have a beginning and then a structure. So you have to think also of forms. And I mean, that brings us maybe to other parts of the conversation tonight. But I think, yeah, I mean, no, there was one last point I wanted to add also into, like, why fundamentally how I try to make pictures, or what kind of images I try to make. I try to make images that, first of all, will make you question what is depicted, you know. Like, so I photographed a lot of the museum spaces, for instance. And yeah, I mean, we love museums. I love museums. I grew up, like, building my visual culture in them and everything. But, like, fundamentally, as a space, you know, you can unpack it and see how weird it is, you know. Like, my idea of, like, being a photographer is also, like, having a Martian perspective, you know, like landing on Earth and, like, looking at people, like, surrounding, like, a pedestal with an object in the middle and some glass surrounding it, and, like, doing this and being very, you know, silent and, you know, having a specific body language. So they are, like, norms, you know, that come into play, like, in a museum space, for instance. And what photography for me has a power to do is to like just arrest our gaze and look again, you know, at like this reality and think again, like not everything is like natural, basically. Not everything is given, you know, and so everything is I mean, a lot is constructed, is artificial, and so let's think about this, you know, and how are these conventions made? Who made them, you know? So the point is to, for me, like to generate some form of critical awareness, you know, through making pictures. And yeah, and also within the images, also I try to keep them a bit enigmatic sometimes so that we even don't know exactly what we're looking at. So we're actually questioning even the act of, I mean, our perception, you know. Because I mean, yeah, it's limited by our senses. And I think for me, that's what photography like also has to talk about, you know, is like our perception of the real.
Yeah. Would you like to react to that or? No,
Well
that's
said.
no.
I agree with it.
I thought you were forming a thought. Yeah, no. Coming exactly to this bombardment that we were talking about. You know, photography is a fairly young art form, and now we can. The fact that we're sitting in an art gallery and looking at photographs and being able to say that it's an art form, I think we've come a long way with how photography is perceived now. But earlier photography was also, it wasn't the most accessible medium because you needed a certain, film was expensive and then developing it was expensive and the cameras were expensive and, you know, there was a lot of, finances involved with that. And we have seen a massive shift and a massive transition in the accessibility of photography. That, you know, we all have our phones and we all keep making pictures. And why are we making these pictures? Maybe it's to remember, but maybe it's also to show because of social media. And I was wondering if, as photographers, how you all deal with this bombardment of images, because I do see and I do notice a lot of multidisciplinary aspects of how you all elongate your works, so to speak. So if you all, you know, can touch upon that aspect of your works as well. Maybe Sheetal can start.
Yeah. I mean, you're right about there being like a visual overload out there. It's, frankly, I find it very overwhelming. There's just too much out there, you know. And I kind of feel that less is more. And I don't really feel the need to document everything. I think maybe earlier I did, but now, since we have so much of over documentation, I kind of feel like I don't want to do that anymore, you know. So in this work, I was seeing how can I also sort of say my story through not only through the photograph, but can I use something else to say the same thing? So I thought I'll bring in my drawings was the first thing. So in COVID as a time, I thought, let me try this, because they were like two compartments in my head. The drawings were always there since I've been drawing since I was a child. So I had all these sketches I'd made over time, over the period of 12 years. So I thought, how would it be if you mix the different elements to say the same story? And I kind of found that it's just, sometimes the drawings can say things that an image can't. Sometimes you find that just a piece of fabric can say so much, a stitch here and there, if you don't want to explain it, you know, because over-explaining just spoils everything, I think. So audience is clever, you know, you don't need to spoon feed it, yeah. So in this work, actually, it's the first time I experimented with using different mediums to say the story. And I kind of felt like it's a beautiful way to do it, at least for me. So with the drawings, then taking images and drawing around it. So this one came when I went back to my hometown and I wanted to sort of go to the fields past the railway track where my grandmother may have passed. And so I was creating these images from my head, like thinking from all the stories I've heard from her childhood. So I kind of felt like if I draw around it, it might feel like this is how I'm trying to piece my story together from everything I've heard. So that was the idea behind that. And I felt this use of, even just if you write something somewhere, that itself carries its own weight, So I really enjoyed mixing up the medium and just going away only from images to say a story. So that was really fun.
I mean, I did also explore a little bit of drawing, or at least like playing with my pencil. I wouldn't call like my stuff like drawing, but I don't know. I think it's interesting how it connects with like your the evolution of your practice. So I just wanted to show a little, because I think it's nice also to show concretely what we're talking about. I mean, this is a photograph taken at the Science Museum in Delhi in 2017, and this is my drawing based on that photograph. It's really like working almost with a tracing paper, I'm just drawing based on the shapes of the photograph, and what I'm touching at here is going back to our subject also of memory, is like how my visits in museums and my exposure to, let's say, Juan Miro or Picasso or Kandinsky, modernist European Western where I grew up, has also conditioned and formatted my way of perceiving the world and of making those photographic frames. So, I mean, I wanted to mention this because of the discussion on memory, but also like just the afternoons I spent like trying to make that drawing, that struggle and that elongation of time is, I think, like one of the response of working with a medium that's evolved into digital technology. There are many ways to react to this. Also, like the prints that I had presented at TARC 2 years ago as part of an exhibition on the cloud, which I will maybe speak about a bit more later, were like cyanotypes. So even that process of like going back into working with like manual paper and chemicals, it changes. It's also very much like lockdown induced project, I guess, where suddenly our perception of time shifted, so I mean, I think that's one way to react to it, is to go more into also the physical, the form, the book, the print, re-engaging with craft, which is something our generation, not only as everyday users who don't make family albums anymore but store their pictures on the cloud, but also even as practitioners and photographers, we think we've made an image once it's on our computer, but actually for me I think the image doesn't exist unless it's printed and unless it's found its form, so that's why events like these are very important, exhibitions, books. And another way I have to react, I try to react to this is to actually incorporate it in my own work, because sometimes I feel I'm a photographer by accident. I did study initially more social science, sociology, anthropology, and I'm interested in photographs as objects. What do they do to our lives? How do they circulate? I remember my first paper in sociology. I wrote on this book by Pierre Bourdieu called Middlebrow Art, and one thing that struck me, he was saying how much there's a division of labor into family photography, which is very gendered. So the man is the one who takes the photographs as the camera. The woman is in charge, of memory keeping.
That's true, though. How come, right?
Well, yeah. it's, I mean, at least he probably draws some hypothesis on that, but it's statistically observed, you know, that so the women were the ones who were in charge of like, you know, not only making the albums, but sharing the photos with the cousins and with the relatives and all of that, you know. So these are interesting for me as social realities. And now that this, I mean, and just going back to the Bodyguard Lane album, all those photos we got were from the women. The women were keeping them, you know. So, and then one day, like, we sat outside on the street and had that, like, moment where we all looked at the photographs, and it was like as if we were sitting in a living room and everyone was peeping in, and like, you were mentioning that also, you know, but it was quite surreal to experience that, like, in the street. So, yeah, I mean, one way to react, I mean, for me to be relevant to this reality is to incorporate that in my work. And, yeah, which is why, like, the last one, The Shape of Clouds, which was conceived during lockdown and presented in that show in Tark, was about, like, how today, like, our relation, I mean, what is a photograph in the age of the cloud, you know? Photographs that don't age anymore, that don't have their own life, that don't sit in a box accumulating whatever dust or not, or, like, you know, having yellow corners, and all our relationship now also. I mean, what I should have mentioned at the very beginning when I was talking about my relationship with, like, family albums, it's also like the arrival point to today, you know, and how I see how, like, we lived in a small historical moment where before, like, the invention of photography, so what is it, like 1820s, there's no photograph as such, you know, there's no record. I mean, there's written record, there's paintings, but there's not that sort of indexical record, and we are suddenly, like, we lived through this very precious moment, I feel, where, like, actually there was a selected then remain of the past, and that's what we're juggling with, and that's why, like, today our generation, I think, works with those materials. But if you look at, like, what's going to happen in 2 generations when everything is recorded and everything is saved, you know, like, what will actually how will people relate to their past? And how will I mean, artistically also, it's another question, but even at a very common level, I'm wondering, because I mean, all of this, it draws from very common experience, you know. But, like, when I see my friend who was a kid and has an app, you know, where every picture is recorded every day and you can go back to it and all, and I'm wondering, like, how, when that kid is, like, 18, you know, and you can see all your life, like, on a device, how will that impact your life, you know? And yeah, that brings me to a small short story which was very revealing for me when I read it when I was doing my research for the show. Was a short story by Borges, the South American writer, José Luis Borges, called Funes el Memorioso, the Memorious. And so it's the story of a guy who rides horses and one day falls and gets a head injury, and after that he cannot forget anything anymore. And Borges, in his own, like, beautiful way, like, describes the days of, like, Funes, like, describing his past few days, and, like, you know, it takes a full day to remember the past one day, no? And so in the end, there's no more space for, like, thinking, for making concepts, for, like, ideating. And I think, like, what I was trying to touch at in that work, The Shape of Clouds, was also what is a civilization that has no space for oblivion, no blank spaces to be filled also with, like what you did, I think, in the work with your grandma, you know. I mean, gaps and voids are very very also inspiring for our imagination, in a sense, you know. And I mean, we already grapple with these questions in terms of attention. Like, I don't have enough time in a day to deal with emails, news, like all of this, like, flux. But it's also in terms of like, we have to see it like in the long run, like with the past also that's accumulating and that's being stored like in the cloud. Like how will we deal with all this?
So we're unfortunately running out of time, but I do want to ask you all one last question. So I was reading photographer Sally Mann's memoir, and she's known to have documented her children extensively. And in that, she writes again a very poignant passage about memory, and I want to read it out to you all, and then maybe you all can react to that. But she says, I tend to agree with the theory that if you want to keep a memory pristine, you must not call upon it too often. For each time it is revisited, you alter it irrevocably, remembering not the original impression left by the experience, but the last time you recalled it. With tiny differences creeping in at us each cycle, the exercise of our memory does not bring us closer to the past, but draws us further away. And do you all have any responses or thoughts about this?
I mean, I think it's so true, and she's said it so beautifully. I kind of feel like when we actually, if you have like a memory of your childhood and you only revisit it once in a while, it kind of stays there. But I've always felt like if I think about it too often as my adult self, I'll be adulterating my memory. And then it's not going to really be what it originally was, you know. And so beautifully said. I fully agree with it. Like I've always felt it, even when I've had these catch-up conversations with mom, and, you know, we'll be like talking about something which happened years ago, and we'll be like about in some event, and if you're talking about some aunt. And then we'll be like, oh, you know, but what if? And then we add our own little story to make it even more spicy. Like, and then if we revisit that, because the spicier version is obviously cooler, so then we revisit that version often enough that then you don't really remember after a while what was the original memory, and all this becomes part of your, what you think is the original memory, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, these like brings many thoughts, like just now, this idea of the spicing up the memory, like I don't know, it makes me think of one of my favorite movie, which is Big Fish by Tim Burton, and how, you know, sometimes also like a little bit of like fiction in there like doesn't harm. But I had read this quote like few years, I mean 1 year before the lockdown. I was going to say the residency, but like for me, like the lockdown almost became like a resident. Actually, I was doing a residency in France. Yeah, just trying to work out my accents a bit because, you know, it became too Indian in the meantime. Yeah, and so. And then I was reading Sally Mann at that time, and that quote like is one of the, you know, most important one. And like one of the works I presented in Leite in Dark was actually very much, I think, inspired by that. Like it was a video work because I love to film photographs being destroyed. I mean, not original ones. I always do copies. Don't worry, especially if it's not mine. But because I do films also, like in my commercial practice and all. But I like to work with video as a medium. But I often do videos with photographs in them because I'm interested, as I explained, in that object. So it was like a diptych, where you had like one photograph that my dad took at a beach, and some photographs that I took that was on the left side, and on the right side were some photographs that I shot myself on the same beach, like throughout my years going there. It was close to where my father spent his retirement. But the point is, like, so it was working like that. Like one image was coming, and the other was disappearing. It was like a balance like this, you know. And so on the left screen, like it was always that same photograph of my mom and my brother, a very beautiful image taken by my dad. Hats off to him. But yeah, so it was coming again and again. And I think like every time it was, because what I do literally is like I put chemicals on photographs and then they dissolve, you know, and the matter like happen. And every time it's a different, you know, configuration that happens. It's different shapes and till it becomes a sort of cloud and then it becomes nothingness, you know. And then I can, with film, I can like fool around and play back and forth, like and reverse it. And for me, it was that really also that kind of, I mean, yeah, it spoke about that variation each time you're recalling, but also that attempt. I mean, I like the words that she used, like calling upon. Yeah. You know, there's almost something like sacred about it or ritualistic about it. I don't know. But so yeah, this is what this quote like inspires to me.
Thank you so much. And we want to open it up to the audience. I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions.
Hi, really lovely hearing you all talk. So, firstly, thank you. I think I've got my understanding of photography correct today. It was always the study of light, but now it's archiving memories. So, thank you. And I face this problem every day where I don't know if because of how I grew up, because of social media or what, but there's this need of instant gratification where if I click a photograph and I like it, I'm like, oh, I need to show this to everyone. So how do you all suggest I practice archiving and how do you all do it? Like not show the photograph to everyone around you and keep it with you for a while, let it mature with time and then make a story out of it. How do you all do that?
Well, I think this. I think in any case, even if you feel like it's ready for the image to be there, I think it's just nicer to hold on to it for a few days because then when you see it in the right light, you know, and I would even hold on to it for some more time. And because who knows, because then you may want to say your own story about it, or you may not feel the same about that image after a week or more. Because I kind of feel like it's just become, not a trend, but it's almost normalized that you just need to document everything and immediately it has to be out there. So it's almost like if you didn't put it out there, it didn't happen at all, you know? So it's, I think those are the times we are in, but I would say hold on to it for some time.
You're talking about photographs that that you're taking with the like artistic intention or like what's your intention between making those images? Like it's also. So I think that's the question to answer first, you know, because we all, as I said at some point, like we all make images like for also various reasons, many utilitarian reasons, like can be for remembering a phone number, you know, like I mean, I know you're not speaking about that, but you might be speaking about like a social interaction that you had, and you want to share that. So in that case, like if it's a social photographs that fulfills like a social purpose, then maybe like share it differently, make a print of it, make an album of it. I don't know, like.
Yeah, I think when you said that a photograph is only a photograph and it's printed, I think that's what I'm going to do now. That's I believe in that.
No, I think we have to look at these family photographs because that was one also of the like question today as like as they are like which is very mundane in a sense, and we should be careful of not romanticizing, you know, them for like just their like aesthetical yellow cornered quality, but on the other end we should recognize like the you know their potential and what they can do, which other images on devices cannot do, you know. So, like, I love, like, for instance, the mounts that existed before for portraits, you know, when people were going to studios to get their portraits taken. Those mounts are so beautiful, you know. Why do they not exist anymore is an error. And it will be rectified at some point because people, and same for albums. Like I mean, I have these endless discussions with friends, and some people are thinking, like there's nobody, everyone is on the cloud now, like useless. No, I think like once eventually like it's just about finding the economic model also for it, you know. And also now we don't want albums that are like plasticky and looking gross, you know. We want like those like nice like butter paper, like nice design. So yeah. So it's about like figuring this out.
No, so thank you for this amazing discussion. Just a quick story. So my dad basically has documented like in 90s, 80s, like a lot of my childhood, my brother's childhood, with like when photography was very expensive as a hobby, right? I mean, and that was never his main profession. And there is a ton of album which exists in our house, and we are so grateful. In fact, it's like my mom can sell her gold, but she will never sell those photographs. It's that precious. And like the thought which came to me for the first time after hearing out this discussion is I want to do someday an exhibition of my dad's collection, because so much time has now passed where he himself has forgotten maybe to use a camera, right? And there is like literally like 3 albums of my mom's photograph on the left side and a matching flower which he has clicked on the right side. And it's quite phenomenal. I still remember the color of the album. It's still there. So the question which I wanted to kind of ask, or maybe just pop up a discussion on, is how do you decide a thematic sort of a focus when you try to bring this private photographs into public, right? Because let's say there are like 200 photographs, right? So this transition of bringing private to public, does that have to be like a larger collective good? Because I think you mentioned that it's not just about your personal story, but it is also about evoking larger sort of stories in public's mind, right? So can you just touch upon that transition from private to public? Like, which photographs do I choose? How do I choose? What is the theme? And of course, like taking consent from my mother is another altogether fight, which I relate with Zara, that I still photograph my mom in 90s and she scolds the hell out of me. But anyways, so yeah.
I kind of feel personally that when we're going to put anything that personal outside, it's a good idea to actually think about what do you want to put out there, because you might have a really big archive, and why do you want to put it out there, and what is the reason? I think when these sort of intentions become really clear, then it becomes obvious what do you feel like sharing, and what is the story that you want to share also, because within your archive and within the family there are millions of stories there, you know. So what is it that you feel like sharing, what feels safe to share? And I would ask all these questions to myself if I'm doing something like that.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one last question.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. So let me just flip it around. These are subjects you probably knew very intimately and you had a lot of time to kind of work on them. And this is coming from a place of me trying to be, you know, a documentary filmmaker, hopefully sometime soon. Is how do you catch something in terms of a character in a person or in a frame very quickly with a time constraint, which means, let's say I was coming from office to here. It's a 10-minute ride. Now, obviously, there's a cab driver and there is some story behind. And how do you kind of process or work on that where time is a constraint? You're kind of trying to capture something in that frame and tell a story behind. Rather than kind of, analyzing, for a long time, etc. How do you kind of flip it around?
Yeah, you mean as opposed as spending 12 years like Sheetal? I mean, I don't know, it comes to like very practical stuff also, like what camera you will have, like I don't know, there are many considerations. It depends on the purpose of your film, like I mean, whatever your... Documenting people? Yeah, but like what kind of, like, are you documenting like any encounter or like I think, you know, like what you're talking about, it's strange because it sounds more like street photography in a sense, you know, like street photography, you don't need necessarily to engage with people, you're more like, you know, and you can like actually be forgotten and not even engage with the people, which is something that I'm exploring right now in my work, and I'm trying to shift also a little bit. With the camera, I mean, now with phone, it's so ubiquitous that it's actually your best tool, you know, for that, like, because it goes unnoticed. But also the question is like, what do you want to take from the people? Questions of consent, question also even of like, I don't know, like engagement, and do you want to start a conversation first and then, you know, like shoot afterward? Like you need also to explain why you're doing this project. I mean, oh, it depends. Like, I mean, it really depends of the larger project for me. Like, it's difficult to answer your question unless I know, like, what is the ultimate project, you know? If it's, like, just capturing, like, daily life in Bombay and cab driver, like, speaking and, you know, like, I think a phone is a great tool, but I don't know if you have any more specific idea you want to share.
I was just trying my hand, a very meta moment right now. You all of you are talking about photographs and memory,
Yeah.
and I was just trying to capture the photographer framing you guys, you know, in that photograph. So he's, you know, capturing the memory of this talk, for example. Just trying my hand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You all have been such a lovely audience, and this has been a very lovely memory. So thank you, Sheetal
Thank you,
and Philippe.
Zara.
And please stick around. Sheetal is going to have a walkthrough of her work. And thank you, everyone. And thanks.